Welcome back, everyone. I am going to be doing another read aloud. Finally, back to some spooky short stories. Channeling high school Emily for the eye makeup today. Just felt like doing so. I know it's not particularly fancy in general, but it's pretty fancy for me with the double eyeliner there. And in case someone feels inclined to point this out to me at some point in the future, um, I know it's uneven. I know that the eyeliner is uneven, and this might shock you, but it's actually uneven because my eyes are uneven. I do not have a symmetrical face. My eyes are, one sits slightly higher up on my face than the other does. It's a difference of millimeters, I'm sure, if I were to actually measure it. And the shape I suppose it's the shape of the eye socket literally in my skull, but it means that they're not quite the same size or shape really either. So when I go to do something like that, so the upper liner there to do the double wing, yeah, it comes out uneven because if I go to follow the line of my eye socket, which is what I do, because they are not the same, then the wings and the eyeliner itself comes out a little bit different. That's the reason. It's literally the shape of my skull. It doesn't bother me. I mean, it used to when I was a teenager, but it doesn't. I mean, it's just my face. I guess I could fix it either. I mean, there's probably some sort of surgery, or I could spend a lot longer trying to get the eyeliner perfectly symmetrical, so perfectly um, the same on either side. I've just never really felt compelled to do it. It doesn't bother me. It's literally just the shape of my face. So if somebody feels that they need to point it out to me, I know. It's been done on purpose. I can't help it. Or at least I can't help it without putting in a lot more effort than what I actually want to. So do bear that in mind if you decide that you feel like making that particular observation. So we've got our water in our, I'll turn it around. Oh, that was terrible. There we go. In my skull mug, which is appropriate for these spooky stories. So after all of that, what are we reading today? We are reading a short story by Robert Barr, who was a Scottish but spent a lot of time in Canada, 19th century writer. He died in 1912, so he did live as a child for a time in Canada, in Toronto actually, so kind of predisposed to give him a shot. He's pretty well known for apparently a lot of sort of detective stories or stories with a twist, which this one has a twist, I am quite happy to say. He also apparently wrote a parody of Sherlock Holmes, which I have never read, but now that I know that that exists, I really want to read it. So I'm gonna see if I can find it. Maybe our library system has it. We are going to be reading a story called An Alpine Divorce. And I'm sure those of you out there familiar with 19th century writing tropes can probably see where this is going. And if you see me moving my arms around a lot, it's because I'm not actually reading off of the computer screen this time. I have a book. I have a real book. So we're going to see how that works. Because if I find I can do it without too much bother, I might switch to doing that, just because although a lot of these short stories are available online, they aren't all available, and sometimes they do require quite a bit of digging to find them. So if I can make this format work, I might be inclined to do it this way from here on in. The only catch is, of course, that my microphone is right where I would be inclined to hold a book. There is a microphone in the way, so I'm just going to be maybe moving around a bit, trying to find a comfortable way to hold the book and hold my arms and be able to reach my mug and all of that, and be able to just use the space without too much difficulty. So with all of that out of the way, oh, and again, nope, not quite finished. The usual warning. This is a 19th century text, and as such, it may contain references, it may contain judgments about women, minorities, mental health issues, religion, race, gender identity, sexuality, anything you can think of that as modern people we find pretty abhorrent, but that is the nature of these old texts. And as I've said, like, I don't really believe in censoring that kind of thing. But if that's absolutely not something you want to hear, feel free to duck on out of this video. And as I always say, I don't remember there being a lot of that in this. It does actually sort of, in a roundabout way, tackle a 19th century social issue. And if there's enough time left after I read the story, maybe we'll get into that. But otherwise, we are good to go. An Alpine Divorce by Robert Barr. In some natures, there are no half-tones, nothing but raw primary colors. John Bodman was a man who was always at one extreme or the other. This probably would have mattered little had he not married a wife whose nature was an exact duplicate of his own. Ooh, yeah, that can be pretty tough. Strong personalities tend to clash. Doubtless there exists in this world precisely the right woman for any given man to marry, and vice versa. But when you consider that a human being has the opportunity of being acquainted with only a few hundred people, and out of the few hundred that there are, and out of the few hundred that there are but a dozen or less whom he knows intimately, and out of the dozen, one or two friends at most, it will be easily seen when we remember the number of millions who inhabit this world, that probably, since the earth was created, the right man has never yet met the right woman. So I have read this, actually. I've read modern people on modern blogs and internet forums and articles talking about this exact thing. If there is a soulmate for everybody, you know, one person that's just right for you in the whole world at any given time, what exactly are the odds of you meeting that person? And I mean that's what a lot of people say, right? Love is just essentially right place, right time with the right chemical reactions in our brains, basically. The mathematical chances are all against such a meeting, and this is the reason that divorce courts exist. You bet, bud. Marriage at best is but a compromise, and if two people happen to be united who are of uncompromising nature, there is trouble. So I should have mentioned he was also known for these sorts of, I want to say, kind of snarky takes on things. This is something Robert Barr is actually known for. So it looks like we have a really good example of that. Half snarkiness, half genuine social commentary going right in at the start there. Which I find quite entertaining. Mind you, I like it anyway. As long as it's not too overt and kind of almost internet edgelord, I don't mind it. I think it's pretty funny. I like it when Jane Austen does it too. In the lives of these two young people, there was no middle distance. The result was bound to be either love or hate, and in the case of Mr. and Mrs. Bodman, it was hate of the most bitter and arrogant kind. In some parts of the world, incompatibility of temper is considered a just case for obtaining a divorce. But in England, no such subtle distinction is made, and so, until the wife become criminal, or the man become both criminal and cruel, these two were linked together by a bond that only death could sever. And there is the 19th century social issue I was hinting at. I mean, if divorce isn't accessible, you're going to get some pretty terrible relationships that people are compelled to stay in. Nothing can be worse than this state of things, and the matter was only made the more hopeless by the fact that Mrs. Bodman lived a blameless life, and her husband was no worse, but rather better than the majority of men. Perhaps, however, that statement held only up to a certain point, for John Bodman had reached a state of mind in which he resolved to get rid of his wife at all hazards. If he had been a poor man, he would have probably deserted, so just left her, run off and left. But he was rich, and a man cannot freely leave a prospering business because his domestic life happens to not be happy. I mean, you could. If you're that good a businessman, I see no reason why you couldn't up and leave and set up shop somewhere else under an assumed name. I feel like people have done that. When a man's mind dwells too much on any one subject, no one can tell just how far he will go. The mind is a delicate instrument, and even the law recognizes that it is easily thrown from its balance. Bodman's friends, for he had friends, claimed that his mind was unhinged, but neither his friends nor his enemies suspected the truth of the episode, which turned out to be the most important, as it was the most ominous event in his life. Ooh. Whether John Bodman was sane or insane at the time he made up his mind to murder his wife will never be known, but there was a certain craftiness in the method he devised to make the crime appear the result of an accident. Nevertheless, cunning is often a quality in a mind that has gone wrong. Well, maybe, but I feel like, what is cunning? But a lot of intelligence and maybe just the sense to keep your mouth shut? I don't know. I don't know if I would agree with that statement. As would, the majority of Slytherins, I'm sure. Mrs. Bodman well knew how much her presence afflicted her husband, but her nature was as relentless as his, and her hatred of him was, if possible, more bitter than his hatred of her. Wherever he went, she accompanied him, and perhaps the idea of murder would never have occurred to him if she had not been so persistent in forcing her presence upon him at all times and on all occasions. Okay, so sure, maybe he needs some personal space, but also that's not a justification to kill her. That's a little bit, no, not even, that's quite a bit of victim blaming, I would say. Not in agreement, but, tongue in cheek, right? So when he announced to her that he intended to spend the month of July in Switzerland, ooh, that sounds nice, she said nothing but made her preparations for the journey. On this occasion, he did not protest, as was usual with him, and so to Switzerland this silent couple departed. Feel like you can kind of get what's happening here. They were not a good match. He doesn't really give any background to why or how they ended up married. You don't know. And in this time period, it could be lots of different things, right? Could be the families wanted it because he's rich, whatever. Maybe she was pregnant. I don't know. There could be lots of reasons. Maybe one or the other was deceptive a little bit. I don't know. And I guess that's part of it, is we don't know why they've ended up together in the first place. There is an hotel near the mountaintops which stands on a ledge over one of the great glaciers. It is 1.5 miles above the level of the sea, and it stands alone, reached by a toilsome road that zigzags up the mountain for 6 miles. There is a wonderful view of snow peaks and glaciers from the verandas of this hotel, and in the neighborhood are many picturesque walks to points more or less dangerous. John Bodman knew the hotel well, and in happier days he had been intimately acquainted with the vicinity. Now that the thought of murder arose in his mind, a certain spot 2 miles distant from the inn continuously haunted him. It was a point of view overlooking everything, and its extremity was protected by a low and crumbling wall. He arose one morning at 4 o'clock. Why? Why you gotta be up at 4? I guess because she insists on coming everywhere with him, but I don't know, pretend to be sick. 4 o'clock. Psh. Oh, maybe he didn't want to be seen. Still. Although I guess if you've made your mind up to murder someone, what's getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning? Slipped unnoticed out of the hotel and went to this point, which was locally named the Hanging Outlook. I have follow-up questions about that name. His memory had served him well. It was exactly the spot, he said to himself. The mountain which rose up behind it was wild and precipitous. There were no inhabitants near to overlook the place. The distant hotel was hidden by a shoulder of rock. The mountains on the other side of the valley were too far away to make it possible for any casual tourist or native to see what was going on the Hanging Outlook. Far down in the valley, the only town in view seemed like a collection of little toy houses. One glance over the crumbling wall at the edge was generally sufficient for a visitor of even the strongest nerves. Yeah, I don't like heights either. There was a sheer drop of more than a mile straight down, and at the distant bottom were jagged rocks and stunted trees that looked in the blue haze like shrubbery. "This is the spot," said the man to himself, "and tomorrow morning is the time." John Bodman had planned his crime as grimly and relentlessly and as coolly as he had concocted a deal on the stock exchange. There was no thought in his mind of mercy for his unconscious victim. His hatred had carried him far. The next morning after breakfast, he said to his wife, "I intend to take a walk in the mountains. Do you wish to come with me?" If I were her, that would be setting off alarm bells. "Yes," she answered briefly. "Very well, then," he said. "I shall be ready at 9 o'clock. "I shall be ready at 9 o'clock, she repeated after him. Okay, that is. At that hour they left the hotel together, to which he was shortly to return alone. They spoke no word to each other on their way to the hanging outlook. The path was practically level, skirting the mountains, for the hanging outlook was not much higher above the sea than the hotel. John Bodman had formed no fixed plan for his procedure when the place was reached. He resolved to be guided by circumstances. I mean, if you're going to murder somebody, I feel like that's when you should have all the plans. Like you should have plan A, B, C, possibly like through to the end of the alphabet. That's not a situation where you should be winging it, in my opinion. Now and then a strange fear arose in his mind that she might cling to him and possibly drag him over the precipice with her. Oh, horrors! She might take me down with her after I've murdered her. He found himself wondering whether she had any premonition of her fate, and one of his reasons for not speaking was the fear that a tremor in his voice might possibly arouse her suspicions. I mean, she's probably suspicious already. You invited her somewhere, which apparently you never do. He resolved that his action should be sharp and sudden, and she might have no chance either to help herself or to drag him with her. Of her screams in that desolate region he had no fear. No one could reach the spot except from the hotel, and no one that morning had left the house, even for an expedition to the glacier, one of the easiest and most populous trips from the place. Lucky him. Curiously enough, when they came within sight of the hanging outlook, Mrs. Bodman stopped and shuddered. Bodman looked at her through the narrow slits of his veiled eyes, and wondered again if she had any suspicion. No one can tell, when two people walk closely together, what unconscious communication one mind may have with another. That's actually pretty true, isn't it? Like when you have friends or family that you're really close to, and you can have almost entire conversations just in gestures and body language. "What is the matter?" he asked gruffly. "Are you tired?" "John," she cried with a gasp in her voice, calling him by his Christian name for the first time in years. "Don't you think that if you had been kinder to me at first, things might have been different?" "It seems to me," he answered, not looking at her, "that it is rather late in the day for discussing that question." "I have much to regret," she said quaveringly. "Have you nothing?" "No," he answered. "Very well," replied his wife, with the usual hardness returning to her voice. "I was merely giving you a chance. Remember that." Her husband looked at her suspiciously. "What do you mean?" he asked, "giving me a chance? I want no chance nor anything else from you. A man accepts nothing from one he hates. My feeling towards you is, I imagine, no secret to you. We are tied together, and you have done your best to make the bondage insupportable. I mean, you're not blameless here either. Like, don't be putting all of this on her. It sounds like you've been pretty terrible too." "Yes," she answered, with her eyes on the ground. "We are tied together. We are tied together." She repeated these words under her breath as they walked the few remaining steps to the outlook. Bodman sat down upon the crumbling wall. The woman dropped her alpenstock on the road and walked nervously to and fro, clasping and unclasping her hands. Her husband caught his breath as the terrible moment drew near. "Why do you walk about like a wild animal?" he cried. "Come here and sit down beside me and be still." She faced him with a light he had never before seen in her eyes, a light of insanity and of hatred. He's probably seen the hatred, let's be honest. "I walk like a wild animal," she said, "because I am one. You spoke a moment ago of your hatred of me, but you are a man, and your hatred is nothing to mine. Bad as you are, much as you wish to break the bond which ties us together, there are still things which I know you would not stoop to. I know there is no thought of murder in your heart, but there is in mine. I will show you, John Bodman, how much I hate you. The man nervously clutched the stone beside him and gave a guilty start as she mentioned murder. Yes, she was a little bit off in that guess. Yes, she continued, I have told all my friends in England that I believe you intended to murder me in Switzerland. Good God, he cried. How can you say such a thing? She sussed you out, though, didn't she, bud? She cottoned on pretty quick to what your intentions were. I say it to show you how much I hate you, how much I am prepared to give for revenge. I have warned the people at the hotel, and when we left, 2 men followed us. The proprietor tried to persuade me not to accompany you. In a few moments, those 2 men will come in sight of the Outlook. Let me try that sentence again. Pardon me. In a few moments, those 2 men will come in sight of the Outlook. Tell them, if you think they will believe you, that it was an accident. The mad woman tore from the front of her dress shreds of lace and scattered them around. Bodman started up to his feet, crying, What are you about? But before he could move towards her, she precipitated herself over the wall and went shrieking and whirling down the awful abyss. The next moment, 2 men came hurriedly around the edge of the rock and found the man standing alone. Even in his bewilderment, he realized that if he told the truth, he would not be believed. And that is the conclusion of An Alpine Divorce. Pardon me, I'm just going to have some water. I did quite like the twist at the end. How she sort of made it so, I mean, it's in what he intended to do anyway. He did intend to kill her. But in a very, I don't know if that is irony or not, but she's one step ahead of him and figures out that if she can set it up right, regardless of whether or not he murders her, even if she jumps and it's technically a suicide. And for some reason, she doesn't think he's capable of murder, which demonstrably he obviously is. But if she can set up the right circumstance, he's gonna get binged for killing her. So 2 hateful people who come to a sticky end because of a marriage that they are forced to stay in. And although I will say, I mean, nowadays you'd probably go to marriage counseling or therapy or something like that, which I realize is not really a thing in this time period, but surely you could have had a few conversations as rational adults and figured out what was going on here. I don't know. It'd be interesting to explore why and how they got to this point where they hate each other this much. So that is today's short story, An Alpine Divorce by Robert Barr. And I don't know about you, but I'm going to see if I can find that Sherlock Holmes parody because that sounds great. So bye, everyone. Thanks for listening to another story with me.